Thank you. Councilmember Fruin?
Yeah, if I could have Margot back up. One of the things that was addressed earlier at some length was essentially how this project complies with AB 130, specifically Public Resources Code 4291. And I would like your take on it because I know that you've written us at some length on this topic, and I think it would be illuminating.
Yes, certainly. So if you look at AB 130, where it references Section 4291, you'll see it lists the provisions. That's the first one listed, and it says Section 4291 of the Public Resources Code or Section 51182 as applicable. So 4291 applies in a state responsibility area. 51182 applies in a local responsibility area. This is a local responsibility area, so it's actually 51182 that applies to the project, but they're very similar. They both address defensible space. Those are typical things that are reviewed at the plan stage. So it would be an acceleration to be trying to demonstrate that now before those plans have been fully prepared. That's the reason that HCD has given you guidance that you can assume that the project will comply with the law. You have a fire department and a building department who are very capable and who just testified this evening that they will not issue permits if those requirements are not met. And so HCD's guidance to you is assume that they will comply and rely on your professional experts when the appropriate plans come in to demonstrate compliance. But we did outline in the letter, if you'd like me to go through them, for the benefit of the public and the rest of the council, we did outline in the letter, I'm just flipping to the page right now, sorry I don't have all this memorized, but we did outline some of the code sections and what they require, and those are listed in the letter that we submitted.
Okay, thank you. You were also in the middle of explaining certain of the potential remedies that would be available to you if the project were denied, and I think that you didn't necessarily get through all of them.
Yeah, I was trying to go quickly. I can slow that down a little bit. So most councils are used to seeing projects where if the project is approved or denied and there's a challenge, the applicant has agreed in advance as part of the application process to indemnify the city for that challenge. That would cover your attorney's fees. Prior to the new housing laws, it was very unusual for cities to have any financial consequences for their action on a project. AB 712, the Housing Accountability Act added some penalties a number of years ago, but AB 712, which was effective this year, really strengthened those penalties for cities that violate housing laws. And if there has been warning from the AG's office or HCD, which in this case there has been through the letter they sent you earlier this week, that an action could violate housing laws, then any party who's suing, not just the applicant, but HCD, the Attorney General's office, any of the YIMBY groups that you see, CBIA, any of them. So I don't mean this by way of threat, but just explaining to you what could happen. Any of those groups, if they sued and prevailed that the city had violated a housing law, the city would be responsible for that party's attorney's fees, no indemnification from the applicant for that. The city would be responsible for minimum fines of $10,000 a unit. Those fines can go higher. That's a minimum in the statute. And then there are two circumstances in which a 5x multiplier can be applied to those minimum fines. One is if the court finds that the city acted in bad faith in its denial of the project. And the other is if the city has previously violated that same housing law. I don't know what your record is, but let's just assume this would be your first. It would be like your first strike. So that in that instance, if there was a second strike, you would have those 5x penalties apply at that time.
Got it. And what would you think ours would be if we had two prior strikes?
I don't actually know. I don't know if it's still 5. Okay. Lifeline. I am not a litigator, so full disclosure, I'm turning to my litigation partner there to let me know. But yeah, so still 5.
Okay. And then amongst other remedies is also obviously in order to approve the project.
Correct. Order to approve the project is among remedies.
What about general damages?
So damages like carry costs for the developer, et cetera. Where those come into play is if there is a successful, I'm going to play litigator here for a minute, he's going to correct me if I'm wrong. If there is a trial court success by the challenger, so the city disapproves, there's litigation, the court says you disapproved wrongfully. If you appeal that decision, you say, we think we were right, there is now a requirement that you post a bond for the cost that the applicant will sustain during that time that appeal is being resolved. So if that is the point, if you had to post that bond and went forward with the appeal, where you would have exposure to additional damages beyond the ones that I just described.
Got it. Okay. I'll have another question, I think, for Mr. Ibrahimi. The permissible density on this site is up to 35 dwelling units per acre at any time. Did you consider a larger project?
Yeah, when we initially looked at the project, us and our sister company, Summerhill Apartment Communities, looked at the project. They would be building up to 35 units per acre. They would be having a site that's 4 to 5 stories. We met with all council members. The feedback that we got was 20 units per acre is the appropriate density for this site. We had a neighborhood meeting during our DD, and we decided to go with the lowest density possible for the site. I would have to say, on projects like this, it is very hard to make a project be feasible, even though most people don't believe this, but it's hard to make a project be feasible with 20% BMR units. In order to make the BMR units that are required for a project to work, you need a certain amount of square footage to make the project viable. One of the things that we looked at when the new code came in for the very high fire hazard was, do we look to work and come up with solutions with the fire department to make our project that was already deemed complete, fire department had already reviewed it, do we find solutions to make this project work, or do we redesign where we're allowed by SB 330 to go 20% higher, provide 800 to 1,000 square foot units, go up to 61 units for the project, be able to go to 4 stories, reduce the setbacks. We had our internal meetings on it. First, we would have to go back to the drawing board, but our application would be live because we're not going higher than the 20% that's allowed by SB 330. We would be able to provide potentially the setback that the new high fire hazard zone will allow, but we would be providing 61 units instead of 51. We would be providing 4-story units instead of 3-story. All of it acceptable by state density bonus law. We made the decision to work with the fire department, come up with alternative methods that in our meetings with the fire department, we truly believed were equal to what the code was looking for. So that's how we winded up with moving forward. I'm just providing this explanation because that's what happened when the new high fire hazard zone came in.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. I also just want to, express my, thanks for talking with all of us over a number of years at this point as you've moved forward with this project, because it has been at least a reasonable ongoing discussion, and we don't necessarily get that with every applicant. And I am certainly most appreciative of what you're willing to do with the height reduction. I understand why you would want some additional assurances with respect to that. If I could also, I know that there's been a lot of interest from the community with respect to evacuation, and I know that you've taken that rather seriously. So if you could give us a synopsis of your view of Dr. Cow's analysis, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. So as we submitted our application through the city and went through several plan check comments about, 4 to 6 months into the project, it was determined that an evacuation study is not required. As we progressed through the project, and there was a lot of, I don't want to call it noise, but there was a lot of feedback to us that there's a lot of questions regarding evacuation and how that would work. We had a couple of meetings with staff. Obviously, we can read the code, but you can always, as an applicant, miss aspects of the code or misunderstand it. So we had a couple of meetings with staff and asked, and this is down the road now, this is, I don't know when, October, November, whenever it was of last year, are there standards that the city has for evacuation? Does the city have objective standards for evacuation? Has the city done an evacuation study for this area? So all of those answers were no. I don't know timeline now, go forward another month or two, somewhere around there. We met with 3 residents individually, and one of the residents, as you mentioned, had done their own internal look study, whatever you want to call that, their own analysis of what they thought it would be. I'm not a traffic engineer. I've been doing this 37 years, but I can't evaluate. I can read a report, but I can't decipher what's real, what's not. So we talked to Hexagon Transportation. They're the experts at it. They actually do this type of work for many jurisdictions. We work with them because they're very good at what they do. We said, look at this report, give us an internal analysis so we understand, is it truly an issue? Is our project truly causing what his report is saying? The feedback that we got was, your project is adding 3.6 or 3.7, I don't remember the exact decibel, let's say 3.6, 3.7% to the overall neighborhood, and that amounts to approximately 2 minutes of added time, which is very different than the homeowner report that was done. So my follow-up question was, okay, so how can it be so different? The short answer that I got, well, we're traffic engineers, this is what we do, this is what we came up with. And I said, what are the criteria that you used? And the answer that I got, well, there is no criteria. We could use what Fair and Pierce used. We could use half an hour, which would be half of what they used. We could use 2 hours, or we could use 4 hours. Go to different jurisdictions, different areas. There's many different standards. So there is no standard. So I gave you, this is my traffic engineer telling me, I gave you what I think is reasonable for here, but some other traffic engineer could look at it and say, this isn't reasonable. Well, you should be looking at it at a different criteria. So essentially, what I got out of it, without criteria, it's very hard to determine what a report should be evaluated based on. So that's the history of it. I think you go back 2 weeks to March 17th, I think is when the hearing, the council hearing was. A few days before that, we got a flurry of emails that had been sent to the city saying Summerhill has done its own evacuation study and is not sharing it. So I sent a letter to each of you explaining kind of what I just explained. We had done this with Hexagon. It was for our internal purposes. I wanted to understand what the neighbors was, to have a better understanding of the issues, and here it is. Here's what they had done. So that's the whole story of it. Any questions you have, I'd be more than happy to answer.
Thank you.